What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel for another video. Today, we're going to talk about stress in training programs. You hear a lot that you want to avoid or reduce stress in training and in competition. In baseball specifically, you hear it a lot about pitchers and their elbows and their shoulders. But is that really a good idea? What even is stress? Is stress bad? Is avoiding and reducing stress a good idea? How do you know what's too much stress and what isn't? We'll answer those and talk about a bit more info over the next few minutes. Subscribe to the channel to get notified of new videos just like this one, and let's get into it. All right, so first off, what is stress? Stress refers to an amount of a load applied to a certain structure, and then that's also applied in a certain direction. Now, these stresses are happening at any given time during a movement. So you could pause a thrower, or really any mover in any movement, and you could calculate the stress that's on each joint or each structure anytime throughout that movement. Now, it's important to keep in mind the speed at which the stress is applied also, but that's kind of a different topic that we won't get into this video. So for example, let's say you made a throw with a motor sleeve on during training. So let's also say that it told you that that throw had 80 Newton meters of elbow torque. So let's break that down. So 80 Newton meters is going to mean you've got 80 Newtons of force away from the fulcrum. So if my elbow here is the fulcrum, we've got 1 meter, and then we're applying 80 Newtons of force 1 meter away from the elbow or from the fulcrum. Now, obviously, the structure we're applying it to here is the elbow, and this is a valgus torque. So what it's trying to do here is it's trying to push the hand outside of the elbow, trying to create a gap here in your elbow. Now, obviously, your body is fighting to keep that from gapping, so it keeps your elbow intact, but that is the direction that the force is being applied. So is stress bad? Well, it's not really bad or good. It just is. It's just a measurement of what's happening. Now, just measuring the stress doesn't really tell us anything about the athlete's ability to handle that stress. Let's take that same example of a thrower who made a throw in training with 80 Newton meters of elbow torque measured by a MODIS. Now, if that athlete has been exposed to well above 80 Newton meters of elbow torque in their training, then it's really going to be a cakewalk handling that amount of torque. However, if that athlete has been exposed to well below 80 Newton meters of elbow torque, you could severely eclipse what they can handle, and you could run into some real issues. All right, so I know I just said that stress isn't bad or good, and yet the title of this video is that stress is good. So how the heck does that make sense? Now, I view stress in a training program as a positive thing, because that stress is what drives the adaptations in the athlete, and that's really what we're trying to do, drive adaptations in an athlete. Which leads to the next obvious question is, what the heck is an adaptation? Well, let's use an example to answer that. Let's say you lift a bunch of heavy weights over the course of a long period of time, so like a year. Your body's gonna build muscle from doing that, right? Like, you're not gonna look the same at the beginning of the year as you do at the end of the year. So all that muscle that you built is an adaptation to the event that you were doing, or the stress that you put on your body, which was lifting the weights. That adaptation is your body's attempt to make you better at whatever you're doing. So you don't just stay the same all the time. Like, your body is constantly either getting better or getting worse at a bunch of different things. Now, there's more than just muscle adaptations, obviously. You've got tendon, ligament, bone. I mean, even in skin, if you look at like a callus, like there's a whole bunch of different adaptations. Neurological as well, like your connection to your muscles to actually fire more muscle fibers. And there's a whole lot that goes into optimizing these adaptations. But that is the general idea. Your body will adapt to the stresses it experiences to get better at handling whatever those stresses are. And without that stress, that process doesn't happen. Let's say you avoid stress too much in your training program. What happens then? Now, you're likely going to run into a situation where your body's not going to be able to handle the stresses that you'll actually need to handle during competition. So you'll be totally fine while you're training. You'll have a nice, easy training session, well, a bunch of nice and easy training sessions. But as those go on, your body will slowly detrain. So you'll get worse and worse and worse. You'll actually lose the adaptations that you had built before. Now, that's a problem because there's a certain baseline level of stress that you'll need to be able to handle in competition. And if you fall well below that, you're really just setting yourself up for an injury when you finally get back into competition. Now, this happens a lot at the big league level right now. So the most common time when pitchers get injured is during spring training. And it's usually due to their massive increase in workload just from not throwing or not stressing their body enough during their off season, and then getting into in season, getting into games. That's a whole lot of stress, very intense game environment. You get a lot out of your body. And if you haven't prepared correctly for those situations, you're going to massively eclipse the stress your body can handle, and you're likely going to end up with an injury. So, super important point to drive home. Avoiding stress too much in training equals your body detraining potentially below the level of competition. And if that happens, that's going to equal you setting yourself up for a potential injury right when you get back into playing. However, like we already mentioned, too much stress is also a bad thing. So you can't just go and apply infinite stress in training because you have a threshold that you need to stay below currently. So if you just massively eclipse your threshold in training, or you have too many stressful events way too quickly, you're just going to get hurt right then. Like, you don't have to wait for competition to detrain and all that stuff. You're just going to get hurt right then and there, which obviously leads right into the question, well, how much stress is too much? And that's a really tough question. In some cases, you're able to directly measure the stress. So like with our MODIS sleeve example, we can directly measure the amount of stress the elbow is getting, obviously an elbow valgus torque. We can directly measure that, and then we can build our programs around that to take you from wherever you are to wherever you want to be in terms of handling stress. In other situations, you can't really measure the stress directly, so you're going to have to use like the weight on the bar, maybe the speed of the bar, or a velocity of the bar or of the throw as a proxy for the stress, because that's really the best thing you have. If you can't measure the stress, you can at least measure like how fast you're moving it, how heavy is it, things like that. And the tough part of this whole thing is there isn't one program that every single person can do, like to follow this exact program. There isn't one of those that 100% guarantees that nobody will build their stresses above what they can handle. It just doesn't exist. There's so much variation from person to person. And this is where paying somebody who does this often takes athletes from where they are to where they want to go safely and effectively. This is where paying that person comes into play and helps you out a whole lot. Now, they're going to take a whole bunch of factors into consideration when writing your program. So things like, what are you on-ramping for? How long have you taken off, and what does your program look like in the past few months? How fast do you adapt to your training? How good is your sleep? Are you getting enough time? Are you getting enough quality sleep? How good's your nutrition? Now, just for some context, most of my on-ramps for athletes back into throwing or lifting, if they're starting like from a completely clean slate, let's say they took like a month or so off, most of those on-ramps are going to take 6 to 8 weeks. Now, I rarely go below 4 weeks if we're going to be on-ramping an athlete. And I rarely go beyond 10 weeks. Now, there are situations where I do either, but it very rarely happens. So let's go ahead and recap. Stress in itself is not good or bad. So if you apply stress that's way above what you can handle, it's going to be bad. If you apply stress right at what you can handle and slowly build yourself up and use it to generate adaptations in an athlete, then it's really good. Avoiding stress completely in a training program is a really bad idea and just sets you up for an injury once you start playing again. Just going out there and trying to put as much stress as you can possibly put on yourself is also a really bad idea because you're just going to get hurt right then and there. And the key is honing in on the amount of stress that you want to apply and when you want to apply it, and to what structures and from what direction to each athlete to get the adaptations that you want from them in a safe but effective manner. All right, guys, well, thank you for making it all the way through. Hope you learned something useful. Subscribe to the channel to get notified of more content just like this right when it comes out.